We build agentic workflows by taking building blocks and putting them together to sequence out these complex workflows. In this video, I'd like to share with you a few of the key design patterns, which are patterns for how you can think about combining these building blocks into more complex workflows. Let's take a look. I think 4 key design patterns for building agentic workflows are reflection, tool-use, planning, and multi-agent collaboration. Let me briefly go over what they mean, and then we'll actually go through most of these in depth later in this course as well. The first of the major design patterns is reflection. So I might go to an LM agent and ask it to write code. And it turns out that an LM might then generate code like this, defines here a Python function to do a certain task. I could then construct a prompt that looks like this. I can say, here's code intended for a certain task, and then copy paste whatever the LM had just output back into this prompt. And then I'm gonna ask it, check the code carefully for correctness, style, and efficiency, and give constructive criticism. And it turns out that the same LM model, prompted this way, may be able to point out some problems with the code. And if I then take this critique and feed it back to the model to say, looks like there's a bug, could you change the code to fix it? Then it may actually come with a better version of the code. To give a preview of tool use, if you're able to run the code and see where the code fails, then feeding that back to the LM can also cause it to be able to iterate and generate a much better, say, V3 version 3 of the code. So reflection is a common design pattern where you can ask the LM to examine its own outputs, or maybe bring in some external sources of information, such as run the code and see if it generates any error messages, and use that as feedback to iterate again and come up with a better version of its output. And this design pattern isn't magic. It does not result in everything working 100% of the time, but sometimes it can be a nice bump in the performance of your system. Now, I've drawn this as if it was a single LLM that I'm prompting, but to foreshadow multi-agent workflows, you can also imagine, instead of having the same model critique itself, you can imagine having a critic agent, and all that is an LLM that's been prompted with instructions like, your role is to critique code, here's code intended for a task, check the code carefully, and so on. And the second critic agent may be able to point out errors or run unit tests, and by having 2 simulated agents, where each agent is just an LM prompted to take on a certain persona, you can have them go back and forth to iterate to get to better output. In addition to reflection pattern, the second important design pattern is tool use, where today LLMs can be given tools, meaning functions that they can call in order to get work done. For example, if you ask an LLM, what's the best coffee maker according to reviewers, and you give it a web search tool, then it can actually search the internet to find much better answers. Or a code execution tool. If you ask a math question like, if I invest $100 at compound interest, what have you in, it can then write code and execute code to compute an answer. Today, different developers have given LMs many different tools for everything from math or data analysis to gather information by fetching things from the web or from various databases, to interface with productivity apps like email, calendar, and so on, as well as to process images and much more. And the ability of an LM to decide what tools to use, meaning what functions to call, that lets the model get a lot more done. The third of the 4 design patterns is planning. This is an example from a paper called Hugging GPT, in which if you ask a system to please generate an image where a girl is reading a book and the pose is the same as the boy in the image, then please describe the new image in your voice, then a model can automatically decide that to carry out this task, it first needs to find a pose determination model to figure out the pose of the boy, then do pose to image to generate a picture of a girl, and an image to text, and then finally text to speech. And so in planning, an LM decides what is the sequence of actions it needs to take. In this case, it is a sequence of API calls so that it can then carry out the right sequence of steps in the right order in order to carry out the task. So rather than the developer hard coding the sequence of steps in advance, this actually lets the LLM decide what are the steps to take. Agents that plan today are harder to control and somewhat more experimental, but sometimes it can give really delightful results. And then finally, multi-agent workflows. Just as a human manager might hire a number of others to work together on a complex project, in some cases, it might make sense for you to hire a set of multiple agents, maybe each of which specializes in a different role, and have them work together to accomplish a complex task. The picture you see here on the left is taken from a project called ChatDev, which is a software framework created by Chen Qian and collaborators. In ChatDev, multiple agents with different roles, like Chief Executive Officer, Programmer, Tester, Designer, and so on, collaborate together as if they were a virtual software company and can collaboratively complete a range of software development tasks. Let's consider another example. If you want to write a marketing brochure, maybe you'd think of hiring a team of 3 people, such as a researcher to do online research, a marketer to write the marketing text, and then finally an editor to edit and polish the text. And so, in a similar way, you might consider building a multi-agent workflow in which you have a simulated research agent, a simulated marketer agent, and a simulated editor agent that then come together to carry out this task for you. Multi-agent workflows are more difficult to control since you don't always know ahead of time what the agents will do, but research has shown that they can result in better outcomes for many complex tasks, including things like writing biographies or deciding on chess moves to make in the game. You'll learn more about multi-agentic workflows later in this course as well. And so of that, I hope you have a sense of what agentic workflows can do, as well as of what are the key challenges of finding building blocks and putting them together, maybe by these design patterns, in order to implement an agentic workflow. And of course, also developing evals so you can see how well your system is doing and keep on improving on it. In the next module, I'd like to share with you a deep dive into the first of these design patterns, that is reflection, and you find that is a maybe surprisingly simple to implement technique that can give the performance of your system sometimes a very nice bump. So let's go on to the next module to learn about the reflection design pattern.